Good evening, everybody. My name's Alex Hildred, and I'm Curator of Ordnance and Human Remains and Head of Research at the Mary Rose Trust. I'm absolutely delighted that the long-standing collaboration between the University of Swansea and the Mary Rose Trust is being honoured in this way, and I'm only really sorry that I can't be with you to enjoy this evening tonight and the award. But I'm afraid, as Curator of Ordnance, I'm on another engagement in Oman measuring the breech chambers of wrought iron guns brought up from a 16th century wreck site. So I wish I could be with you and share this wonderful experience. For those of you who might not know the Mary Rose story off by heart, she was one of Henry VIII's favourite warships, one of the 20 great ships within his fleet. She was built at his request very soon after he came to the throne in 1509, and she sailed very, very well until 2 years before he died, and she sank protecting Portsmouth Harbour from a French invasion on July 19th, 1545. The position of the ship was known, and in fact Tudor salvors tried to raise her soon after the sinking in 1545, luckily for us, unsuccessfully. Fast forward until the mid-60s, when scuba diving is available to many people, and a local amateur historian named Alex McKee was looking for historic wrecks in the Solent, and he pinned his hopes on the Mary Rose. Luckily, within a few years, an iron gun was found, then the timbers of the ship, and between 1971 and 1979, the timbers of the outside of the ship were found. In 1979, the Mary Rose Trust was formed with the aims of completely excavating her and raising her. This happened between 1979 and 1982, and still is the largest underwater excavation ever undertaken. The result is we have half of a ship, the starboard side, and 19,000 objects, all perfectly dated to July 19th, 1545. We now house those in a purpose-built museum in Portsmouth, Hampshire. I first joined the project as a volunteer diver, and in fact, if it wasn't for the 500 volunteer divers, we wouldn't have a shipwreck, we wouldn't have all these objects, and it's been a huge endeavour of people helping from the very beginning. So this was in October 1979, and it was dark and it was cold and the weather was atrocious, and my first dive I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. But like many, I persevered, and at the end of the 1979 season I was asked to stay on as a member of the Mary Rose Trust staff, and I've stayed on ever since, doing a variety of different roles. But I first encountered some of the objects that in fact began our collaboration with the University of Swansea in 1980, when we were excavating on the upper deck and we came across these chests of long sticks. And it wasn't long before we realized we were actually looking at some of the 250 longbows that were issued to Henry VIII's warship, the Mary Rose, some of them complete in their chests stored in the orlop deck of the Mary Rose. Of the 19,000 objects raised, actually we found the remains of 139 complete longbows and parts of the 9,600 arrows that were actually listed with the ship. Some of the other remains included the human remains belonging to the 500 crew, most of whom perished when the Mary Rose sank. Very early on, we realized that some of the shoulder bones seemed to show signs of excessive wear, and that began our interest in whether or not we could isolate archers from the rest of the crew due to the fact that they pull heavy bows. So we went through a number of iterations of how to do this, and one interesting way of looking at it came up about 6 years ago when we decided to look at the biomechanics involved in archery itself. And that's when we started with the University of Swansea, looking at actually what stresses archers would be under when they were pulling these long bows. Some of the weights that were suggested are up to 180 pounds draw weight. And if we compare that to a modern elite archer in the Olympics, for example, today, you're looking at 48 pounds for a man. So, you know, these were huge stresses that these individuals were under. And therefore that began actually looking at where the stresses were most, and it happened to be on the radii of these individuals, and so began the project with the university of looking at the pairs of our radii and seeing if that's the lower arm bones in the arm, looking to see whether we could isolate asymmetry between them, because we knew that the draw forces were greater on one arm than the other. And so one of the projects was to develop methodologies for where do you take sections, for example, of these bones so that you can look at one bone and look at another and be sure that you're actually getting the same section. So actually creating methodologies for future work for both osteologists and archaeologists. So we were actually creating information that would be used elsewhere, in fact writing the guidebook for this sort of thing. And so then we began to look at, well, if we can get so much from the scanning, perhaps we should look at other methods like photogrammetry, and whether whether or not we could get 3D images that could be shown to osteologists around the world, because we're still considering human remains, in order to get valuable information without actually handling the human remains. So the byproduct of that would be immediate access through the internet to hundreds of osteologists worldwide, not just 4 or 5, to our latest collaboration, which is the creation of the Virtual Tutors website, which is a really exciting concept because it's got a website that appeals to the general public, where we've got the scanned skull of an individual, one of our crew that are our major key points in the Mary Rose exhibition, and the belongings. So you can look at the carpenter, turn the skull around and examine the skull in a number of different ways, and you can also look at 10 objects that either relate to carpentry on board or are actually owned or used by the carpenter on board. So that's the public section of the website. But the research side is actually to test the boundaries of how we can use these virtual bones for really good high quality osteological analysis. So what we have on the research side that you have to get into by proving that you are undertaking osteological research, 10 scanned skulls of the 179 recovered, and those are available to researchers to actually test the system. So they're invited to look at them, to make any of the analysis that they can from handling the virtual skulls, and to fill out a questionnaire about the reliability and the validity of the subject. So in that way we can really test the boundaries of this as a technique for further work. This site was phenomenally successful. We couldn't anticipate the results we've had. We've had over 700,000 hits so far. Things like the shoe were really looked at by a huge number of individuals, the carpenter's skull, and in fact we've got already over 30 people interested in doing the osteological research. Virtual Tutor website, which was a collaboration which included Swansea, Mary Rose Trust and Oxford University, is actually the first of 2 proposals. The second is a much larger grant proposal for a Wellcome to actually study a whole range of aspects of the human remains on the Mary Rose and to compare them with other wreck sites of the 16th, 17th and 18th century. Wellcome proposal looks at the human remains and the individuals found on the Mary Rose by a number of different techniques. It involves biomechanics, it involves looking at the bones themselves, actually osteology, it involves looking at laser scans, photogrammetry, so the makeup of the bones, but it also involves a study of the DNA of the individuals, of the isotopes that they absorbed during their formative years, so that might suggest where they were from, and it's a multi-collaborative award between these 3 different universities, and we hope that we'll learn more about both the men on the Mary Rose, and we're opening that to other seafaring populations. So we're looking at the Vasa and the Cronin from the 16th century and the 17th century in Sweden, and we're hoping to get results on what the mariners really of that period were like in this very important period of seafaring history. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and when you go home, don't forget to go and Google www.virtualtutors.org and have a look for yourself. Good evening.